Okay, we're now recording, everybody. So good. We missed all the coming and going of who was coming in the meeting and all that. So that part's good. I'm sorry. So let me repeat what we just talked about, just so we have it recorded. Hopefully I get it all. If I missed something that I said earlier, y'all can chime in and clarify it again. So we started out last week with two big working groups that we were going to have: instruction and health and safety. The health and safety group has been divided into two smaller working groups: operations and whole child. This is the group for whole child support. In the shared folder that Ms. Townley shared with everybody, there are several documents for the whole child working group team. There's first the governor's PowerPoint slides from the plan that he rolled out a couple weeks ago. And then there is a list of objectives for our working group that our goal for today, or my goal for the group, and you guys can chime in, of course, is to, one, get through the list of objectives and assign the work to the people that would be most appropriate for and that are interested in those pieces. And then secondly, to add anything to those objectives that might be missing or that we can think of and we need to add for future work. So I think I said that really condensed, less than what I said in the first few minutes before I accidentally forgot to record. Did I miss anything? All good? Okay. I'm going to try and watch the chat also as we're going. So if you see me kind of get delayed a second, it's because I see something pop up and I want to make sure we're addressing it. So if you hopefully have the objectives in front of you, but I'll still read through them in case people don't. The first objective is to create a crisis response team at the district and school level that typically is kind of built upon each school's current pandemic response plan. And we want to build what that team is going to look like and have that in place by July 22nd. So as our schools already have in place, when we have some kind of an emergency or typically a pandemic, we have a plan from the influenza emergency that happened several years ago, pandemic, and all our schools put together a plan for that. It outlines already a framework for what those crisis response teams look like. We can mirror after that and then kind of tweak it as much as we need to for what the team would need to look like going into the school year for this. So we'll need a group to kind of work on that and do that. The second objective is to create a framework for guidance and structure around the following topics for our school-based leaders. And that includes the pandemic response team that each school would have. We are having principal meetings July 22nd and 23rd. Every summer, we always have a back-to-school principals meeting during that week. It typically lasts a couple days, and we do a lot of operational things and back-to-school updates and stuff like that with our principals. So we're still doing that this year. Of course, it's all going to be virtual, as far as I know at the moment. But some of the topics that we need to make sure that we are presenting information to them on those days I'm going to list them in a second, but I can tell you that some of these are things that we already would be giving them information on, just a part of our regular work that we do. It's not even specific to the COVID crisis and the shutdown or reopening school. It's just our regular work. So we're going to see, I think in our group, a lot of overlap with things that we do already and what we need to implement for this process. So some of the topics, and we of course can add to this if we need to, are social emotional needs of our students. We know that there's been a huge focus on that as we've gone through this pandemic, not only for our students, but also for our staff as well. So we need to focus on what that's going to look like. Our mental health services that we have, just a couple years ago after the Parkland shooting, we had increase in support from our state as far as implementing mental health services for our students. We have a full department for that. That's what Dr. Olson leads, and she's on the team. So we have a lot of that stuff already in place, but we want to expand upon that. And we've already been, even before all this, been talking about how we were going to do that for our schools. There is a very high level focus on trauma-informed schools for that process and trauma supports for our kiddos, because we know this situation has been traumatic for several of our folks on various levels. Of course, we have our students with disabilities. Those will be our special topics that we need to talk about. Any therapies that those students receive, any services, speech, language, occupational therapy, physical therapy, behavior support, you name it, all those things. And then how we're going to handle IEP meetings and updates, which a lot of that we've already been working on as well with our ESC department. We have our migrant students, one of our special populations that have some unique needs and some things that we need to be able to focus on and ensure of how we're supporting them, resources for them that they may not typically have. And we have a team that typically works on that already, so we'll be expanding on that. Our Hearth program for our students who are in foster care or are homeless, those special populations as well. How are we going to reach out to them? What supports do they need in place? A lot of them don't have the resources necessarily, especially technology-wise, to be doing virtual learning. So we need to talk about that. And then our special medical populations, we have a lot of students who have very high risk needs as far as their medical status. We do know who they are, and we already provide very extensive medical support for them throughout the day anyways. But we need to talk about what that's going to look like, because if they are coming back to school, what does that look like? And then if they're not, how are they going to receive their educational services? And we've talked about some of that as well through our departments. So we can add topics to that section. But those are the things that we're going to need to be able to explain to our principals and our assistant principals in late July when we're ready to present all that to them. And then the other big objective is that we need to take our information and cross-reference it with our instructional continuity plan and the instructional group to make sure that everything is in alignment. That's going to be pretty intensive as far as going through that work. You can see that under that objective, there's some pretty big groups and focuses that we're going to need to look at as far as what are our teacher responsibilities, including our ESE staff and our ESOL populations. What are our administrative responsibilities? How are we supporting our staff and our community? What are our school counselors, our mental health counselors doing, which would be part of that group we already talked about. All of our ESE and our students on Section 504 accommodation plans, they are students with disabilities as well that receive accommodations. And then our non-instructional staff. So all of our staff who aren't specifically classroom teachers, but have other various roles throughout their campuses and throughout the district. What does that look like? The section on district policy and procedures for student privacy and safety. We're talking about students' records or certain medical things that they have going on, or those kinds of things. That's going to be a deep one. We also have our records and our databases. So how our technology systems function as far as how we do our master schedules, how we do student grades. A lot of that's going to definitely overlap with the instructional committee. They'll be focusing a lot on that too, but we need to look at that. There are very specific protocols and things that we have to follow for our ESE students and our ESOL students, our English language learners. And then content delivery, and this is one of the most challenging ones that I think we're going to have is our ESE and ELL accommodations and modifications. How do, doing that in a face-to-face setting for teachers is one thing, but doing that in a virtual platform is a whole nother level. And thankfully, my experience has been through the last several months that our teachers have highly risen to the occasion of supporting the needs of our kids and being very creative with a lot of things that they've done. So I'm kind of happy that we've had that experience to be able to build upon. But we're definitely going to need to look at that a little bit more in depth to make sure that what we're proposing to support the whole child will align with what the instructional team is putting in the instructional continuity plan. So I've got Rhonda's question, what about deaf and hard of hearing students? Many of them have parents who may not know sign language and communicate with them. Is this, yes, absolutely. This is a population we're going to be focusing on. We know, Rhonda, that our deaf, hard of hearing students are going to have some very unique challenges based on the need to have, interpretation and a lot of different things. And definitely going to be relying on you and Gina for your expertise in those areas and ideas, because I know y'all are the gurus on what we can do for those kiddos. You guys know I rely on you for a lot of that stuff anyway.
Thank you.
So that's all the objectives. What I'd kind of like to do is first hear from everybody. Is there anything that you think is missing that we can add? We're not going to make any decisions today. We don't have any, we're not going to have I wanted to kind of do this in some sequence to really see what we're working on first and then start the work itself. So if you want to share some ideas or things that we need to add, we can get them written in. And then I think before we end, we can kind of put some names by some of these areas and kind of form some small groups. If you guys are okay with it, I'm going to ask our principal leaders that are in the group to probably take on the lead for some of these because they're natural born leaders anyway. And then we can kind of go from there.
Hey, Dr. Stanky, I have a question for you.
Okay.
It's Alan Duget. So we're talking as if we're back in school and we're completely having to shut down. This is why we're going through these objectives and processes right now.
Yes, we're planning basically at this point, as far as I understand it, and that's a question I can confirm and clarify with Ms. Townley and Mr. Hill later. But as far as I know, we're planning for a full back face-to-face plan at this point. I mean, that's kind of how I'm picturing it in my mind. I could be totally wrong on that. I know that our plan our proposal that we've put out for the district is face-to-face or virtual are options for our families. That may evolve into some other options. I don't know, as a part of this group and just conversations and how things are changing on a literally daily basis. But as far as I know right now, I'm looking at it as what we can do face-to-face for our kiddos, but also obviously consider the kids that are not going to be face-to-face because they're still going to need a lot of these things. Some of them flat out require them as a part of their IEPs or their 504 plans or just their history of services or support. And then others are just going to need them because of just the situation as it is.
Dr. Steinke, I have a question, and you all may have answered this in some of your previous meetings, but if we're looking at this as far as the objectives going back face-to-face, will we also have objectives for the virtual schools for like the accommodations and related services? Simply because I'm asking that because I know Polk Virtual is kind of its own entity. So how will that look like for students getting those related services?
Right, that's what I'm saying. We are planning for, we're kind of planning this kind of both ways. I know just a second ago I said primarily face-to-face, but we are going to have to consider those kids that are doing virtual, whether they're on Polk Virtual or home education students. They're kind of parents' responsibility on their own that way, but we are going to have to consider what we're doing for those kiddos.
Okay, thank you.
Now I have a question. E-learning, will that be totally different than Polk Virtual? So we have to shut down. Will all of those kids go to Polk Virtual, or will we have an e-learning curriculum for the week we shut down, or whatever that may be?
That, I think, from what I understand, is something that we're still discussing as far as an option, a third option. And e-learning, just as I understand it and defined so everybody's aware, is basically that the students would remain enrolled in their zone school or their current school of enrollment, whatever that is, traditional brick and mortar school. And instead of doing virtual, if the parent wanted them to stay home or they needed to stay home based on their medical condition or whatever other reason, instead of enrolling through Polk Virtual, they would do e-learning with their current school. I personally kind of view that as kind of what we've been doing for the last month through distance learning. but I think it could take on a higher level of focus and structure because we're going to have had more time to kind of plan it and look, kind of filter it through based on our experiences over the last couple of months. That's how I understand it may work, but I don't know that any of that has been specifically decided yet. So
Dr. Oh, I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
I'm sorry. I was just going to say now, is that something only temporary if the school closes down, or is that a third option, like maybe going forward for like ESE students that need those related services and stuff like that? Or is that just like a third option that's a possibility if it's needed?
I think it's a possible third option that we're considering.
Okay.
And here's the thing. Based on the conversations I've had, we know that we have students, whether they're disabled or not, that may not be able to be in school, not because of themselves, but because of maybe they have people at home that they cannot, they can't be exposed possibly to something and then bring it home. So they're going to need to stay home. And they want to participate in schooling with their regular class, their regular teacher and everything at school. The parents don't want to do Polk virtual. So that would be the option for them. And then, we also know that we have students with disabilities that just by the nature of their disability, Polk virtual is not something that they can fully benefit and participate in. And that's always been the case. That's not just due to this pandemic, that's historical.
Right.
So we're kind of looking at how would we accommodate and modify some things for them. And that may be a structure that we can do it through.
Okay, thank you. That makes sense.
Okay. Brandy, I'm going to ask Ms. Burgos has had her hand up for a minute, so I'm going to let her go. And then Brandy, you're next.
Yes, those options include preschool?
Yes, as far as I know, they do. Yes.
Okay, so the parents can decide if they are going virtual or actually to the campus?
You know what? I need to find out if Polk Virtual does, I personally don't know. Does anybody else know if Polk Virtual does pre-K or how that works?
Thank you for that. See it. I didn't see it on there the other day. I saw just elementary through high school.
Yeah, let me find out. That's definitely going to have to be something that we clarify so that we're aware as a group and make sure we consider those students and whatever options or plans that we're making. So thank you. We'll get that clarification.
Thank you.
Okay. Brandy?
I've big questions I've seen in the community is about pre-K and how that's going to work for everybody.
Right. Okay. Understood. But the thing is on our list of supports here and kind of objectives, there's no mention of pre-K on here or anything that we need to consider for them. So I like the idea that it's come up and that's something that we're missing off of here. We need to add. Brandy,
so as we break into, oh, sorry, go ahead.
Brandy, you're on mute. Can't hear you. No, I can see you, but I can't hear you. Sarah, go ahead while Brandy's typing in her comment or question.
So as we break into these smaller groups, like the policies that we have in place now for trauma and things like that are listed, we will receive those procedures as how they sit now, and then we will be adding to those if need be, correct?
Yes. Yes, that's exactly how I think it can work in some of those areas. Like Dr. Olson, when we get to that point, she can share a lot of the stuff that we already have going on with mental health and some things that we were planning for the fall, actually for July and the fall for our staff. We've actually been providing mental health services throughout the summer and have a provision for that already. And that can just continue and through the fall. And then we've been working on some other items with the staff. on how to increase those supports and address the specific trauma area. So I think some of that can definitely already be in place based on the work we've already done. And then if the task force and our group decides that anything additional might be needed, we can address that as well. And that'll be the same for some of the other topics as well, like for migrant students and HARP. We'll have to determine who can, who we need to get involved in that kind of conversation. We've got district staff, of course, that lead those groups, but we can add that as well. Okay, Brandy's question.
Can we bring those people in? So people who have been working on that inside the district, can we bring those into our talks to get their guidance? Or
yes, I believe so, because the reality is that, we have different kind of tentacles of people that do different legs of different pieces of work that make everything happen, and we're going to have to rely on them. We're not going to be able to kind of decide all this ourselves. The other pieces, of course, a lot of them are going to be responsible for rolling out a lot of the work, and so I definitely want to make sure that they're involved in understanding what we're focusing on. So yes. Okay, Brandy's question. One, what about adult ESE education? Are they in this as well? Adult ESE meaning our 18 to 22-year-olds? Yes, they're going to be included. Most of our 18 to 22-year-old students with disabilities are either typically in our center schools or are in our ESE transition programs. That would be one of the two places that they're currently enrolled. So if they're in a center school, they're obviously going to be served however we serve our center school students. In our transition programs, we're definitely going to have some conversations because they're out in our communities and in our workforce part. So yes, they're definitely. And then question 2, is e-learning another way to say tethering education? I'm not necessarily sure what tethering education means. I've not heard that phrase myself. So we might need to explore that. If anybody else has heard that and can explain it, please feel free to.
that is what Hillsborough is calling what I assume would be the e-learning.
Oh, okay.
So that's what Hillsborough is calling it, I believe.
Okay.
Dr. Steinke, I have a quick question. On the create a crisis response team, so is that referring to if someone ended up developing COVID, how to deal with that in the school setting? Is that what you're talking about for the crisis response team? Like how we handle that?
I believe it could be that. It could be if we had a situation where a school had to shut down for some reason, if there was, an individual school. It could be how the, if a student comes in one day or a staff member, and it happens in the middle of the day, you find out. Or it could be a situation where you've got a class going and been going for a while, and all of a sudden the teacher contracts it. Now the teacher's going to have to be gone and out for 14 days. It could be a variety of things, but yes. And I'm glad you asked that question because we will need to clarify that. We have crisis response teams, as most of you know, at our schools already and in our district for various different types of crises. So a pandemic response plan crisis team obviously is for certain, medical kinds of conditions and things like that. But our model for crisis response teams when it comes to situations where students or staff are hurt or injured or unfortunately die for various reasons, we have methods of how we respond to those types of situations. Or if we have an emergency situation on a campus with, a safety situation. So we can model after a lot of those processes to kind of determine what we want to do. Thankfully, we won't be starting from scratch for that piece.
Okay.
Any other questions or any other areas that anybody thinks might be missing off this list that we need to add to it?
One more question. Is the safety protocol, because this has been split up into 3 sections. We have academics, we have this one, and then we have a safety. Isn't the safety one doing how protocol happens if we get ill on the job and or some child gets ill? So are we just focusing on the ESC parents and all of that, or they're focusing on the general population, or are we all coming up with the same stuff and then, you know?
No, they're doing the, what do you do as far as, you know, safety for how you take the temperature, how do you separate the students, those kinds of things.
Okay.
I think what our level is, and that's a good thing we'll need to clarify, because none of us need to be doing double work on anything, that's for
Right.
sure. Is that if it was a school-wide kind of a situation or another district-wide crisis all of a sudden one day, or overnight, you know, when we had to shut down in March, we literally found out on a Friday afternoon, and then we were shut down for a week and then spring break. So I think maybe in that kind of situation, so that our principals are aware of what their steps are to take.
All right. Thank you.
No problem. Christy?
I would think too, we're looking at what if a classroom is affected? So maybe the teacher is tested positive and then the whole class has to be tested because she was exposed, and how we support the emotional needs of the classroom and the teacher at that point, or how far it spreads.
Right, exactly. That's what I was going to say too. And I think that's one thing we need to remember, is that we're focusing on more of the social, emotional kinds of things that are going to go on with those things, or kids, because that happens in a crisis situation when we have a teacher death, unfortunately, or a student death. They see the student there one day and the next day they're not, and how the kids respond to that and how the staff responds to that is a critical, very critical process. And we do have, you know, steps outlined for schools to follow in those situations. So I think it's something like that. Ms. Burgos, you had your hand up again. Go ahead.
No. If I click it, I'm sorry.
Okay. I'll turn it off. I think I can lower hand. Yep, there we go. Okay, Rhonda.
Yes, going back to this third option of the virtual school or the virtual e-learning, I noticed online on Polk County's website, right now it shows the 2 different choices. Is this something that the district will kind of incorporate and add to the website so that people understand there is a third option? Or is that going to be held just for ESE students, or?
No, well, so first, that wouldn't be just for ESE students if it occurs.
Okay.
But secondly, I don't know that formal decision or anything has been made. I think what's happened is, literally in the last couple days, as other districts have kind of rolled out their plans, of course, we're all looking at each other to see where the consistencies and the differences are, because, you know, we learn from each other, and we try and model each other for consistency purposes, or just to steal each other's great ideas. And so I think what's kind of happened is, as we've seen Hillsborough or Pasco or some of these other ones that have rolled out some options, we're looking at them and wondering, okay, can that work for us? How is that working? There's a lot of logistics that go behind a lot of those things. So I know as that option has kind of come up, and we didn't necessarily put it out as one of ours, we're talking about, okay, how can we do that? Because we want to give our families and our staff as many options as possible, but obviously still meet what we need to do for educational purposes.
Right.
So I think if and as those decisions evolve and it's made, then of course, yeah, the website would be updated to reflect whatever those changes are. I can tell you for me personally, with our division, of course, with Learning Support Division and the populations that we focus on, we've already been talking about, even before the governor's plan and everything came out, how are we going to serve our kiddos that we know physically can't be in school and cannot necessarily fully benefit from a Polk virtual situation? They are going to be our challenges, unfortunately, because their needs are unique. And, you know, we love having them in school and seeing them face to face. But if that's not an option, what does that look like?
Right.
So that's what some of that discussion is just evolving.
Okay, especially for deaf and hard of hearing students, only because of that related service as interpreters. You know, you've got to think about the logistics of then do all those interpreters, if they did go to Polk Virtual, do they switch over to that school? You know, that kind of thing. So I was just, Gina and I were talking about that, about how difficult it would be if deaf and hard of hearing students did attend Polk Virtual, just because
Right.
of the logistics of the interpreter services.
Right.
Yeah,
And we have responsibilities, we know, regardless of if kids were not in this pandemic and students were taking Polk Virtual that were deaf, hard of hearing, what does that look like? So I think we can have that conversation just to determine anyways. And
Right.
then as you know, we look at our staff and our needs and make those adjustments as best as we can
Right.
on a
Right.
regular basis.
Right. Okay, thank you.
No problem. Sarah, go ahead.
So in our very first meeting that we had, I had asked about our center schools, and I was told by Miss Townley that our center school principals had been working on something. She didn't elaborate. Do we have anybody from the center schools in this committee? Because I think our center schools are going to be our most profound and our most need when we get to that point. Medical, the services, things like that. Do we have anybody in this group that can
Yes,
help with
ma'am.
that?
Me. I act, as you know, I supervise all 3 of the center schools. So, and those principals, and have been working with them very closely over the last couple of months on this and some ideas. April Sumner, our principal at Gino Dell, is actually on the other health and safety committee. And we talked about which committees would be best for us for those specific needs, and just determined that she would handle that part and I would handle this part, and then we would kind of collaborate on what those ideas are. And a lot of the things that we've talked about as far as kind of that third option with our students is something we're kind of trying to figure out for our center school students. We also obviously have our hospital homebound services, which I know a lot of districts are using for a lot of their more severe students with disabilities as far as providing services, which is a routine thing that we already have anyway. So we're trying to figure out how we can coordinate all of that together. But yes, we're been very much well aware of what to do with our center school kiddos. And those principals have been working together and have some great ideas. They know their kiddos, they know their families. They've been working with them very closely and their staff to determine what can work best with them and their population.
Great, thank you.
No problem. Okay, I don't see any more hands raised or anything, and we've got about 10 minutes because I want to keep respect of everybody's time and things. I think it's probably be easiest if you guys wanted to just email me and tell me which area, okay, let me back up. You could go into the shared folder and look at the list of objectives that are on there. The one I have added is some information we need to look at for pre-K, because that was missing somewhere. Review the document, kind of see where you think you could fit in and where you'd like to really focus on, and then send me that feedback. And then I'll kind of frame it together with everybody. And then if there's some areas that kind of end up heavier than others and we're missing, we'll kind of go back and forth, and then I'll email that way, and then determine what we want to do. And then our next meeting is officially scheduled for next Wednesday, the 1st. And we can kind of go from there on what those different groups will be doing and how you can do it. And there might be obviously some things that kind of go on via email a little bit, because I think like some of the stuff with mental health that we're already doing, Dr. Olson and I can work on sharing some of that information out with you or putting it in our folder so you kind of have an update on what we're doing there. You know, those different pieces we can already get in place so that you can review them over time. That sound okay? Does anybody have any other ideas?
Will we be able to, once we break out in these kind of separate subcommittees, will we be able to meet as a team, or do we need to wait on our actual meeting like this? So I guess what I'm saying is, could we do a second meeting outside of this with our committee members, to try to get some information together? Or
yes, we can have some smaller group meetings just to kind of dig through some of the details and things. All we would need to make sure is that when we do come back for these recorded meetings and things, that we have report outs on what that group might have done. So we can keep it all on record and know, and everybody stay up to date. And that will also provide us an opportunity to see where we may have some of things overlapping. We're not going to be able to obviously do everything just in these 1 hour meetings once a week. That's not going to be safe as far as getting everything done. And, as far as any literally face-to-face meetings, if some groups need to have them, we can do that, of course, as long as we follow the social distancing guidelines and, and all that. I can offer space here at Gibbons at our pre-K center here in Bartow if we need some meeting space. We have some rooms where we can spread out in, or depending on how many people it is, if anybody needs some locations for that, we can happily do that as well. Okay.
thank you.
No problem. So I think at this point, the next task for everybody is to go into the share folder, review the objectives, and send me an email on where you think you would like to focus on your work for this group. And of course, if anybody has any other ideas or anything you think of later after we hang up, or next week or something, shoot me an email and we can add it to the list of topics to work on with the group. Okay. All right, I'm officially going to stop the recording now.